They say you don't know what you have until it's gone, but what I discovered was far more painful. Sometimes what you think you have was never really there at all. I'm Ethan Reynolds, and this is the story of how I lost my marriage but found myself in the process. I still remember the first time I saw Olivia. It was at a tech conference in San Francisco 5 years ago. I was there representing my investment firm's Sustainable Ventures division, and she was presenting on digital marketing strategies that actually connect with consumers. The moment she took the stage, it was like everyone else in the room faded into background noise. She had this presence, confident without being arrogant, passionate without being overbearing. Her dark hair fell just past her shoulders, and when she smiled, these little dimples appeared that made her look simultaneously professional and mischievous. After her presentation, I worked up the courage to approach her at the networking event. I remember fumbling with my business card, trying to appear composed, while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Your presentation was incredible," I said, immediately cringing at how generic it sounded. But then she smiled. That smile that would eventually become both my comfort and my undoing, and said, "Let me guess. You're one of those rare finance guys who actually cares about sustainability beyond the profit margins." She had me pegged in 10 seconds flat. That was Olivia, perceptive, sharp, and somehow able to see parts of me I didn't even recognize in myself yet. We ended up talking for hours, missing the next two panels entirely. By the time we exchanged numbers, it felt like we'd known each other for years instead of hours. Our long-distance courtship between Seattle and San Francisco lasted only 3 months before she landed a position at Apex Digital in my city. I still remember helping her move into her downtown apartment, both of us giddy with the possibility of seeing each other whenever we wanted. Seattle embraced us, or maybe we embraced it. Our weekends were filled with ferry rides to Bainbridge Island, where we'd sample local wines, hikes through the lush Cascade Mountains when the weather permitted, and discovering hidden neighborhood bistros, where the chefs knew us by name. We created rituals that became the scaffolding of our relationship. Sunday mornings meant coffee and almond croissants at Raindrop Cafe, where the barista already started making our order the moment we walked in. We began collecting vinyl records from every place we traveled, soundtracking our love story with everything from Portuguese fado to New Orleans jazz. And then there was the dream jar, a simple mason jar where we'd slip handwritten notes about our future plans, the coastal cottage we'd retire in, the countries we'd explore together, the family traditions we'd create. Looking back, I realize how those little scraps of paper represented all the invisible threads we were using to stitch our lives together. I proposed a year later, on a cliffside trail overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The ring had belonged to my grandmother, a simple diamond with sapphires on either side, representing loyalty and wisdom. Olivia cried when I explained its significance. "I want to grow wise with you," she whispered against my lips after saying yes. Our wedding was everything we'd hoped for, intimate and deeply personal. Just 50 guests gathered at a restored boathouse overlooking Puget Sound. Her vows made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. "Ethan," she'd said, her voice clear and unwavering, "you are the person who makes me believe in the goodness of second chances. Before you, I was someone who kept parts of myself hidden away. But you've shown me that being fully seen is not something to fear, but something to cherish. I promise to always see you, truly see you, and to let myself be seen in return." I remember thinking that nothing could possibly match the perfection of that moment, that feeling of absolute certainty of having found my home in another person. During our honeymoon along the Oregon coast in a small cabin with no Wi-Fi and spotty cell service, Olivia wrote me a letter. 6 pages, front and back, detailing all the ways she loved me and all the dreams she had for our future together. I kept that letter in my desk drawer at work, reading it whenever I needed emotional grounding. The paper eventually became soft and creased from handling, but her words remained as powerful as the day she wrote them. Life settled into a rhythm after that. We bought our house in Queen Anne, a renovated Craftsman with enough character to charm us, but enough modern touches to make life comfortable. From our back deck, we could see the Space Needle and, on clear days, the shimmering waters of Puget Sound. We painted rooms together on weekends, planted a small garden, and hosted dinner parties where our diverse friend groups merged into one extended family. For 2 years, everything was Not perfect, because no relationship is, but real and solid and good. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. The shift started after Olivia received a major promotion at Apex Digital. She was made creative director for Northwest Tech, one of the fastest growing tech companies in the region. I was so proud of her. We celebrated with champagne on our deck, making plans for what we'd do with her salary increase, more travel perhaps, starting that renovation on the master bathroom we'd been putting off. At first, the changes were easy to rationalize. Her hours got longer, understandable for someone taking on a high-profile client. Our Sunday morning coffee ritual became sporadic, then virtually non-existent. "I just need to catch up on sleep," she'd murmur without opening her eyes when I suggested heading to Raindrop. The dream jar gathered dust on our mantel, no new notes added in months. I started noticing concerning patterns, but pushed my worries aside. Olivia no longer curled against me at night. There was always a physical gap between us in bed now. When I'd move closer, she'd shift away in her sleep, as if unconsciously maintaining that distance. When I initiated intimacy, she had a rotating list of reasons why tonight wasn't good. Headaches, early meetings, general exhaustion. Our conversations, once flowing and connective, became largely transactional. Who would pick up groceries, when the plumber was coming, whether her dry cleaning was ready. I adapted the way people do when they're afraid of losing something precious. I tried to become indispensable. I took on more household responsibilities, prepared meals she could heat up when working late, rescheduled my own commitments to accommodate her increasingly unpredictable schedule. I became the perfect supportive husband, believing that if I removed every possible source of stress or conflict from our home life, she'd have the space to reconnect with me emotionally. Despite my efforts, the distance between us grew. Olivia began guarding her phone carefully. She added security features and kept it face down or in her pocket. Her calendar filled with appointments marked only as private, with no further details. When I asked about them casually, she'd give vague responses about client meetings or team-building exercises. It was during a rainy weekend getaway at a cabin near Mount Rainier, a trip I'd planned as a surprise anniversary celebration, that I finally confronted the terrifying question I'd been avoiding. Was I sharing my life with a stranger? We'd arrived at the cabin on Friday evening after fighting Seattle traffic for hours. The tension between us was palpable, but I remained hopeful that the change of scenery would help us reconnect. I'd packed her favorite wine, ingredients for the pasta dish I'd made on our third date, and even brought the old record player with the first vinyl we'd bought together. That night, after dinner and drinks beside the fireplace, I reached for her. Her response was mechanical, her body present but her eyes vacant, going through motions that used to be meaningful. Afterward, she fell asleep quickly, turned away from me, while I lay awake listening to rain drumming against the roof, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. The next morning, while Olivia showered, I found myself turning the pages of our wedding album. I traced my finger over the images of us, laughing, dancing, feeding each other cake. The woman in those photos looked at me with such tenderness, such presence. Where had she gone? And why couldn't I reach her anymore? As Olivia slept peacefully that night, I sat alone by the fire, watching embers glow and fade, confronting a question that terrified me. Had I lost her, or had I never truly known her at all? Have you ever felt someone slipping away despite your best efforts? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know if you've experienced something similar. It was 2 weeks after the cabin trip when everything changed. Olivia had left for a 3-day marketing conference in Portland, and I was working from home. Our printer had been acting up, so when I needed to print some financial projections for an upcoming client meeting, I remembered that Olivia had mentioned setting up cloud printing on her laptop before she left. I opened her laptop, something that had never been off limits between us, intending only to access the printer settings. That's when I noticed her email was still open. I wasn't looking for anything. I had no intention of invading her privacy. But a name caught my eye in the subject line of a recent message. Ethan situation, next steps. My finger hovered over the trackpad. There was still time to close the laptop to respect the boundaries of our marriage, but something in me needed to know. With a sick feeling in my stomach, I clicked. What followed was like watching a horror movie, where you're also the main character. Dozens, no, hundreds, of email exchanges between Olivia and her college roommate Rebecca, stretched back months. As I scrolled through them, each message was another body blow, another piece of evidence that the marriage I thought I had was a carefully constructed illusion. I feel nothing when Ethan touches me anymore, Olivia had written 3 months earlier. It's like my body physically rejects his affection. I have to close my eyes and think about something else just to get through it. Do you still care about him at all? Rebecca had asked. I care about him like you care about a longtime friend, Olivia responded. But love, I don't know anymore. Sometimes I dream about what it would be like to date different types of men. Someone more assertive, more spontaneous, more, I don't know, just different. Ethan is so steady, so dependable. It was comforting at first, but now it just feels suffocating. My hands were shaking as I continued to read. The most devastating revelations weren't about her fading feelings, but about the calculated strategy she'd been employing. There were detailed discussions about the optimal timing for separation based on tax implications. I'll wait until after the house equity grows a bit more, she'd written. The market is supposed to spike next quarter, according to Ethan's projections. Then came the mentions of someone named Jason, her fitness instructor at the gym I'd been too busy working to attend. Being around Jason makes me feel more alive than I've felt with Ethan in months, she'd confided to Rebecca. Nothing physical has happened, but there's this energy between us. He sees me as a woman, not just as someone's wife or someone's creative director. But it was the draft email, saved but never sent, that finally broke me. In it, Olivia detailed plans to convince me to sell our house and move into a luxury condo downtown, a move that would be primarily funded by my savings and equity portion. She'd outlined arguments she would use to persuade me, including appeals to my environmental values, smaller carbon footprint, and my desire to make her happy. The most chilling part came at the end. He's been acting different lately, more independent, less clingy, but we both know Ethan. He's an addict for love. I just need to give him a few signals and he'll come crawling back. He always does. I stared at those words until they blurred on the screen. An addict for love. Crawling back. How had she come to see me with such contempt? When had I become someone to be manipulated rather than loved? I closed the laptop and sat in our silent house, feeling something shift irrevocably inside me. The pain was physical, a hollowness expanding in my chest, making it difficult to breathe. But beneath the pain, something else was emerging. Clarity. For the first time in months, I could see our relationship for what it had become. And more importantly, I could see myself, how I'd gradually surrendered my identity, my boundaries, my self-respect, in a desperate attempt to salvage something that no longer existed. Instead of confronting Olivia immediately when she returned from Portland, I made a different decision, one that would ultimately change everything. I decided to reclaim myself first. The changes started small but deliberate. I stopped initiating conversations beyond necessary household coordination. I no longer prepared meals for her or adjusted my schedule to accommodate hers. I didn't ask about her day or share details about mine unless she specifically asked. I treated her with polite detachment, the way you might treat a roommate rather than a spouse. Simultaneously, I began reconnecting with parts of myself I'd surrendered. I rejoined my photography club, which met every Thursday evening. Previously a night I'd kept open in case Olivia wanted to have dinner together. I reached out to friends I'd neglected, including my old friend Marcus, whose background in therapy made him an invaluable sounding board. I opened a separate bank account and began diverting a portion of my income into it, not out of pettiness, but as a concrete step toward financial independence. I established routines that had nothing to do with Olivia or our marriage. Early morning runs along the waterfront, weekend photography expeditions to capture Seattle's moody landscapes, evening classes in darkroom techniques. It took Olivia 3 weeks to notice the change. She came home early one Wednesday, finding me preparing dinner, just for myself. "There's enough for 2 if you want some," I said casually, not looking up from the stove. "What's going on with you lately?" she asked, hovering in the kitchen doorway. "You seem different." I met her eyes then, allowing myself to really look at her without the desperate need to find reassurance in her expression. "I am different," I replied simply, then turned back to my cooking. "Are you seeing someone else?" The question came out sharp, accusing. A small, sad smile crossed my face as I plated my food. "Yes, there is someone else," I said quietly. "Me." The confusion on her face would have been comical in another context. She had no script for this version of me. The one who wasn't pursuing her, wasn't trying to win her back, wasn't placing her at the center of his universe. As the weeks passed, I watched with a strange detachment as Olivia began employing tactics to reconnect. She started preparing elaborate meals, my favorites from earlier in our relationship. She initiated physical intimacy with a determination that might have flattered me once but now felt calculated. She created romantic scenarios, wine on the deck at sunset, surprise concert tickets that seemed designed to remind me of our courtship period. I participated in these activities politely but maintained emotional distance. I was civil, even kind, but no longer invested in the outcome. It was as if I was observing our interaction from above, rather than being swept along by it. The breaking point came 2 months after I discovered the emails. I'd been offered an opportunity to participate in a photography exhibition in New York, a significant recognition of work I'd been doing quietly for years. The exhibition would require me to be in New York for 2 weeks. In our previous dynamic, I would have either declined the opportunity or found a way for Olivia to join me. Instead, I simply informed her of my plans. 2 weeks is a long time, she said, a hint of panic in her voice. Can't they find someone local? They want me, I replied, continuing to pack. And I want to go. So what I want doesn't matter anymore? She demanded, finally showing the frustration that had been building. I stopped packing and turned to face her. Olivia, I've spent the last 3 years organizing my life around what you want. I'm done with that. What's that supposed to mean? Instead of answering directly, I went to my desk and retrieved a folder. Inside was a printout of her draft email about the condo, along with selected portions of her correspondence with Rebecca. I placed it on the bed between us. It means I know everything, I said quietly. I know how you feel when I touch you. I know about your strategic planning for our separation. I know about Jason. I know you see me as someone to be manipulated rather than respected. The color drained from her face as she flipped through the pages. You went through my emails, she whispered, attempting to shift the focus to my transgression rather than hers. Yes, I did. By accident initially, but then deliberately. And I won't apologize for it, because it showed me the truth you've been hiding. Ethan, those were private thoughts, moments of frustration. Everyone has doubts sometimes. I cut her off. Doubts are normal. Systematic deception isn't. She began to cry then, the kind of tears that had always undone me in the past. I never meant to hurt you, she said between sobs. I've been confused, under pressure at work, trying to figure out what I want. And that's exactly why I'm going to New York, I replied, my voice steady. Because I'm no longer willing to put my life on hold while you figure out whether or not you want to be in this marriage. I finished packing in silence, booked a room at the Harborview Hotel downtown for the night, and placed my house keys on the dining table beside the folder of emails. I have nothing left to lose, I told her as I walked out the door. What would you do if you discovered your partner had been emotionally betraying you for months? Would you try to rebuild or walk away? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about relationships, betrayal, and healing. The 2 weeks in New York were transformative. Away from the emotional battlefield our home had become, I reconnected with my passion for photography and met other artists who saw value in my perspective. Among them was Elena Diaz, a gallery owner whose sharp insights and quiet confidence reminded me of who I used to be before I became someone's husband first and myself second. Your work has a quality of intimate distance, she told me over coffee after viewing my exhibition. Like you're simultaneously deeply connected to your subjects, but also standing slightly apart, observing. I smiled, recognizing how perfectly she described not just my photography but my current emotional state. That's exactly how I feel about my life right now, I admitted. Elena became a friend and eventually a professional mentor, but nothing more. I wasn't ready for that, and something in me knew that replacing one relationship immediately with another would only continue the cycle of dependency I was working to break. Meanwhile, Olivia's communications evolved rapidly. Her initial texts were angry and defensive. I can't believe you're embarrassing me like this. And people are starting to ask questions. When those received minimal response, she shifted to remorse. I never meant to hurt you, and I was lost and took it out on you. Finally, when I was preparing to return to Seattle, came the appeals. Please come home. We can work through this together. I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't move back into our house immediately. Instead, I rented a small apartment overlooking Elliott Bay and established a new routine. During this separation, I experienced an unexpected sense of liberation. Without the constant anxiety of trying to save my marriage, I rediscovered simple pleasures. Reading for hours without interruption, taking spontaneous road trips to photograph the dramatic Washington coastline, reconnecting with friends I'd neglected. Olivia cycled through strategies to win me back. When grand romantic gestures failed, she attempted to make me jealous by mentioning male colleagues. When that backfired, she tried vulnerability, showing up at my apartment in tears, claiming she'd finally recognized the depth of her issues. My therapist says I have abandonment issues from my father leaving, she explained during one of our careful coffee meetings. I push people away before they can leave me. I create distance when things get too intimate. There was likely truth in this. But I also recognized that insight doesn't automatically change behavior, and that her patterns were deeply ingrained. When we finally had an honest conversation 3 months into our separation, Olivia revealed what I'd long suspected. Her crippling fear of emotional dependency stemmed from watching her mother's destruction after her father's abandonment when Olivia was 12. She became nothing without him, Olivia explained, her voice hollow with the memory. Just a shell walking around our house in her bathrobe for months. I swore I'd never let another person have that kind of power over me. So instead, you made sure you had power over me, I said quietly. It wasn't an accusation, just a recognition of the pattern we'd created together. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I didn't even realize I was doing it until you left. But when you walked out that door and didn't come crawling back, it broke something open in me. I had to face who I've become. I established non-negotiable terms for any potential reconciliation. Couples therapy with a specialist in attachment issues, a post-nuptial agreement protecting our individual assets, complete honesty about all past deceptions, including the full extent of her relationship with Jason, and most importantly, the recognition that rebuilding trust would be a long, uncomfortable process without guaranteed success. To her credit, Olivia agreed to everything. We began the painstaking process of examination and rebuilding. In therapy, we uncovered patterns neither of us had recognized. How her emotional withdrawal triggered my anxious pursuit, which in turn caused her to retreat further. How we'd both used work as an escape from addressing the growing distance. How neither of us had learned healthy conflict resolution from our families of origin. 2 months into our cautious reconciliation attempt, Olivia's mother was hospitalized with pneumonia. I accompanied her to the hospital, witnessing firsthand her instinctive emotional withdrawal in the face of potential loss. But this time, I gently confronted the pattern. You're disappearing right in front of me, I said, taking her hand in the hospital corridor. Stay present. Stay here with me and with her. For the first time, she allowed herself to be truly vulnerable with me, collapsing into tears that weren't tactical or manipulative, but genuinely connective. I held her while she shook with sobs in the hospital waiting room, neither of us caring who witnessed this raw moment. But despite these breakthroughs, I recognized that something fundamental had changed in me. The emotional bond that had once connected us had frayed beyond repair. I could acknowledge Olivia's genuine efforts toward growth without feeling responsible for healing her pain. I could appreciate the history we shared without feeling obligated to create a future together. The final shift came when Elena called from New York with an unexpected opportunity. A partnership in her gallery with the chance to establish a Seattle branch focusing on Pacific Northwest photographers. Your eye for talent is as impressive as your own work, she told me. We could build something meaningful together. When I shared the news with Olivia, I watched her face carefully. The old Olivia would have found ways to subtly undermine this opportunity or make it contingent on her needs. Instead, she smiled with genuine warmth. You'd be amazing at that, she said. It's perfect for you. In that moment of unconditional support, coming far too late, I knew with certainty that our marriage had served its purpose in both our lives. We had changed each other, helped each other grow, but were no longer meant to grow together. Our arrangement now confuses people. We're legally married but lead separate lives. We see each other occasionally for dinner or to attend mutual friends' gatherings. We even consult each other on professional matters where our expertise overlaps. When people ask why we haven't divorced, I find myself giving different answers depending on the day. The truth is complex and still evolving. Olivia didn't lose me because I found someone else. She lost me because I finally chose myself over forgiving someone who no longer deserved it. In reclaiming my worth, I discovered that the light she once claimed to see in me had never actually dimmed. I had simply been looking for its reflection in her eyes when, all along, the source was within. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about relationships, recovery, and rediscovering yourself after betrayal. And remember, sometimes the most important relationship to salvage is the one with yourself.